actions to be performed in relation to the Four Noble Truths. It is crucial that one understands and performs the necessary duties in relation to each of the Four Noble Truths. A correct presentation and correct practice of the Four Noble Truths relies on an accurate linking up between each distinct truth and its corresponding responsibility or action. A failure to do this results in misunderstandings and incorrect practice. A lack of understanding about the duties connected to each of the Four Noble Truths also leads to misunderstanding about Buddhism in general. For example, the belief that Buddhism is a pessimistic teaching. The four duties in respect to the Four Noble Truths are as follows. 1. Suffering should be fully understood. Dukkhaṃ ariyasaccaṃ pariññāyāṃ. 2. The cause of suffering should be abandoned. Dukkha samudayo ariyasaccaṃ pahatabhaṃ. 3. The cessation of suffering should be realized. Dukkha nirodho ariyasaccaṃ satchikattabhaṃ. 4. The way leading to the cessation of suffering should be developed. Dukkha nirodha gamini patipada ariyasaccaṃ bhāvettabhaṃ. A. Thorough knowledge, pariññā. The duty in respect to suffering is thorough understanding. One should investigate and understand suffering as it truly is. One should clearly understand relevant problems and determine the extent of these problems. This is a fundamental stage of spiritual practice, enabling one to progress to subsequent stages and to understand the heart of the human predicament. B. Abandonment, pahana. The duty in respect to the causes for suffering is to eliminate them. To bring the causes for suffering to an end, one should remove the source of suffering. C. Realization, satchikiriya. The duty in respect to the cessation of suffering is to realize or attain such cessation, to reach a state in which the essential problems have been solved, where one is completely free from these problems and has reached the goal of spiritual practice. D. Cultivation, bhavana. The duty in respect to the path is to literally bring into existence, to generate and to increase, i.e. to train oneself according to the factors of the path, to undertake the practice of the path which eliminates the source of suffering, to follow the methods which lead to the goal, to establish the details of spiritual practice, and to apply these in order to solve problems. It is necessary to attend to and accomplish these duties correctly, matching each duty with its appropriate truth. To perform these duties correctly requires knowledge, jnana. The knowledge of these duties in Pali is referred to Kiccha jnana. Applying this knowledge to link each noble truth with its matching duty corresponds to different stages of spiritual practice, and it can be used for solving every kind of human problem. 1. Knowledge of the duty in relation to dukkha. To know that suffering needs to be thoroughly understood. To understand the nature of suffering, the basis of suffering, and the locus of suffering. This understanding accords with reality. which differs from understanding things according to how we want them to be or according to aversion. For instance, as a particular stage of practice, this refers to the stage of describing or assessing problems which must be defined and understood. 2. Knowledge of the duty in relation to samudaya, to know that the cause of suffering needs to be abandoned, to understand the causes of suffering which should be eliminated. This is the stage of inquiry and analysis, of diagnosing the source of suffering, which must be completely eradicated. 3. Knowledge of the duty in relation to nirodha, to know that the cessation of suffering needs to be realized, to understand the cessation of suffering, which should be realized. This is the stage of focusing on the end of suffering, the goal of spiritual practice, by recognizing that solving the human predicament is possible, worthy, and something that should be accomplished. Moreover, one knows how to reach this goal. 4. Knowledge of the duty in relation to magga, to know that the path needs to be cultivated, to understand the path or the way of practice leading to the end of suffering, which should be developed and brought to completion. This is the stage of setting down or acknowledging the methods, stages, and details of practice used for eliminating the source of suffering, which need to be applied and undertaken. In some we know what our problems are. We know the nature of our suffering. We know the source of that suffering. We know what to aspire to, or what achievement is truly desirable, and we know what must be done. We know how to proceed. The knowledge of duties, Kicayana, is one of the 3 kinds of knowledge connected to the Four Noble Truths, which are used as criteria for determining enlightenment. When a person truly knows the Four Noble Truths with these 3 kinds of knowledge, comprising 12 factors, he or she is said to be awakened. These 3 kinds of knowledge are referred to collectively as knowledge and vision, jnana dasana. This knowledge and vision is comprised of 3 cycles or realms, parivata, constituting the 3 kinds of knowledge. 1. Knowledge of the truths, satya jnana, knowledge of the Four Noble Truths as they really are. This is suffering, this is the source of suffering, this is the end of suffering, this is the way leading to the end of suffering. Suffering is like this, the source of suffering is like this, the end of suffering is like this, the way leading to the end of suffering is like this. This knowledge completes the first round, parivata. 2. Knowledge of duties, Kicayana, knowledge of the required duties, propose of each of the Four Noble Truths. Dukkha should be fully understood. The cause of suffering should be abandoned, etc., as described above. This knowledge completes the second round. 3. Knowledge of what has been done, Katayana, knowledge of having accomplished the duties in respect to the Four Noble Truths. One knows suffering, which should be fully understood, has been fully understood. The cause, which should be abandoned, has been abandoned. Cessation, which should be realized, has been realized. The path, which should be developed, has been developed. This knowledge completes the third round. These 3 realms occur in relation to each of the 4 truths, resulting in 12 factors, akara, of knowledge and vision. knowledge and vision, jnana dasana, thus has 3 cycles, parivata, containing 12 factors. The Buddha possessed knowledge and vision of the Four Noble Truths in their 3 realms. He realized the 12 factors, and therefore he declared that he had achieved the unsurpassed supreme enlightenment. Knowledge and vision containing these 12 factors is used as a criterion for verifying all forms of spiritual accomplishment. This knowledge with its realms and factors can be outlined as follows. 1. Suffering is like this, it should be fully understood, it has been fully understood. 2. The cause is like this, it should be abandoned, it has been abandoned. 3. Cessation is like this, it should be realized, it has been realized. 4. The path is like this, it should be developed, it has been developed. Four Noble Truths, dukkha, 3 kinds of knowledge. Knowledge of the truths, to know that suffering is this way, to know what the problems are. Knowledge of duties, to know that suffering should be fully understood, to know that one must understand the nature and extent of problems. Knowledge of what has been done, to know that suffering has been fully understood, to know that one has understood the nature and extent of problems. Again, Four Noble Truths, samudaya, to know that the cause is this way, to know that knowledge of the truths, to know that the cause is this way, to know that craving is the cause of suffering, to know what the causes for problems are. Knowledge of duties, to know that the cause should be abandoned, to know that one must abandon craving, to know that one must solve problems at their source. Knowledge of what has been done, to know that the cause has been abandoned, to know that craving has been abandoned, to know that the source of problems has been eliminated. Four Noble Truths, nirodha, 3 kinds of knowledge. Knowledge of the truths, to know that cessation is this way, to know that nibbana is the cessation of suffering, to know what is truly desirable. Knowledge of duties, to know that cessation should be realized, to know that nibbana should be realized, to know that this is the goal. Knowledge of what has been done, to know that cessation, nibbana, has been realized, to know that the goal has been reached. And Four Noble Truths, magga, knowledge of the truths, to know that the path is this way, to know that the path of cessation has 8 factors, to know what methods exist for solving problems. Knowledge of duties, to know that the path should be developed, to know that one should cultivate the Eightfold Path, to know that one should undertake and apply the methods for solving problems. Knowledge of what has been done, to know that the path has been developed, to know that one has practiced in accord with the Eightfold Path, to know that one has completed and concluded the methods for solving problems. Note also the following points. 1. Dukkha is paired with the duty of clear understanding, parinya, in the sense that suffering should be clearly understood. Therefore, suffering and all things that are classified as problems are collectively referred to as things which should be clearly understood, parinyaya dhamma. 2. Samudaya is paired with the duty of relinquishment, pahana, in the sense that the causes for suffering should be abandoned or eliminated. Therefore, craving and all things classified as causes for suffering, example, ignorance, greed, hatred, and grasping, are collectively referred to as things to be relinquished, Pathataba Dhamma. 3. Nirodha is paired with the duty of realization, Satchikiriya, in the sense that the cessation of suffering should be realized. Therefore, Nibbana and things related to the goal are called things to be realized, Satchikatapa Dhamma. 4. Magga is paired with the duty of cultivation, Bhavana, in the sense that the path should be developed. The Eightfold Path and all practices and methods for reaching the goal are called things to be cultivated, Bhavetaba Dhamma. Everything that exists without exception can be classified as and incorporated into one of these 4 groups. On the path leading to the end of suffering, from rudimentary stages to the refined, and from relating to external things to realizing profound phenomena in the mind, it is always possible to associate the things which one experiences with one of these 4 groups. For example, at the highest level of practice of contemplating the essence of truth, the Buddha described these 4 qualities as follows. 1. Dukkha, things should be understood, Parinyaya Dhamma equals the 5 aggregates of clinging. 2. Samudaya, things to be abandoned, Pathataba Dhamma equals ignorance, avidya and craving for existence, Bhavatana. 3. Nirodha, things to be realized, Satchikatapa Dhamma equals true knowledge, vidya and liberation, Vimutti. 4. Magga, things to be developed, Bhavetaba Dhamma equals tranquility, shamatha and insight, Vipassana. 6. Summary of the 4 Noble Truths. The commentaries offer some interesting analogies for the 4 Noble Truths. Dukkha is similar to an illness, Samudaya is similar to the cause of illness, Nirodha is similar to the freedom from illness, Magga is similar to the medicine for curing the illness, Dukkha is similar to a famine, Samudaya is similar to an absence of rain, Nirodha is similar to abundance and plenitude, Magga is similar to a good rainfall. Dukkha is similar to danger, Samudaya is similar to the cause of danger, Nirodha is similar to an escape from the danger, Magga is similar to the means for escaping the danger. Dukkha is similar to a heavy load, Samudaya is similar to carrying the heavy load, Nirodha is similar to putting down the heavy load, Magga is similar to the procedures for putting down the heavy load. The Visuddhimagga, the Samoha Vinodani, and the Sadhammapakasini offer brief and cogent explanations for why the Buddha arranged the 4 Noble Truths in the order that he did. Dukkha. The focus commences on suffering in order to apply wisdom. Suffering is oppressive and affects all human beings. Whenever suffering arises, it is arresting and kindles concern. Even if one looks beyond one's own personal experience, one sees the various afflictions and difficulties that continually beset human beings as the normal state of affairs. Suffering is apparent to all people, it manifests clearly, it impels interest and is thus suitable as a regular subject for contemplation, in particular as the starting point for teaching the Dhamma. Moreover, suffering is considered displeasing and frightening for most people. Although it is unavoidable, they do not want to think about it. If one makes people aware of how they are currently experiencing suffering, or generating problems, they may be shaken from their state of complacency. The Buddha taught people about suffering in order for them to begin to contemplate and solve their problems. By teaching the Four Noble Truths, beginning with suffering, one commences with the problems at hand, with things that are clearly evident, with things that are arresting, and most importantly with things that have a direct relevance to people. One does not begin with abstract ideas, fanciful notions, or mere rhetoric. When teaching an individual, one speaks on a subject pertinent to him or her, and when teaching objectively, one speaks on a subject relevant to all people. The Buddha taught about suffering, not to promote suffering, but to act as the starting point for ending suffering. He knew that suffering can be brought to cessation. It is not a compulsory or permanent condition. Life is frustrating when it is still disturbed by suffering. If one is able to bring an end to suffering, or if one becomes skilled at solving problems, then life becomes peaceful and truly happy. Solving problems is not achieved by avoiding or turning a blind eye to suffering. Just the opposite, it is achieved by acknowledging and facing suffering. This does not mean simply enduring suffering or generating more suffering. Rather, it means to gain insight into suffering in order to be able to be free from it. Instead of accumulating suffering, one attends to it with wisdom. Gaining insight is equivalent to performing the correct duty vis-a-vis suffering. Gaining insight is equivalent to performing the duty vis-a-vis suffering. That is comprehensive understanding, parinya. One understands the nature of suffering, where it arises, and the extent of the problems. Often people avoid suffering and run away from problems, even though they know that problems exist. They only have a vague or confused understanding about them. By understanding suffering, one's responsibility in this area is accomplished. This is similar to a doctor who diagnoses the symptoms of an illness and understands its nature, thus fulfilling one stage in the process of curing it. It is not our responsibility to eliminate or abandon suffering, because cessation is not found at suffering itself. One must dispel it at its cause. Trying to abandon suffering is like treating an illness only at its symptoms, say by taking medicine in order to alleviate the pain. The illness has not been cured, and one must continue to search for its causes. Just as a doctor studying the nature of illness must also study about the human body, which is the home of illness, so too a practitioner who studies the nature of suffering in order to bring about its end must study all aspects of human life, which continue the basis of suffering, along with the nature of conditioned phenomena which play a participatory role. The gist of the First Noble Truth is to recognize suffering as it truly is, and to discern the true nature of human life and the world around us. B. Samudaya, the source of suffering. Searching for the true causes of suffering rather than attributing blame. If one wishes for the cessation of suffering, one must eliminate its causes. When one recognizes the nature of one's suffering, how and where it manifests, it is time to investigate further for its causes in order to accomplish the duty of abandonment or elimination, bhana. In many cases, however, when searching for the source of suffering, people flee from the truth. They tend to look outside of themselves or focus on events removed from what is happening in the present moment. They therefore look for an external agent on whom to lay blame, or try to distance themselves from the problem so as to feel that they are not responsible. Laying blame on external factors leads to three false doctrines. 1. Purbe Kata Wada, the doctrine of past karma. The belief that all present happiness and suffering results from past actions. The claim that all happiness and suffering is connected to past actions. 2. Isharani Mana Wada, the doctrine of a supreme God, the belief that all present happiness and suffering is created by a supreme God, whether one is escaping ill fortune or seeking good fortune. One thus relies on the providence of divine beings. 3. Ahetu Wada, the doctrine of fate, the belief that all present happiness and suffering is random and pointless, without cause and condition. One believes that neither positive nor negative events can be altered. When their destined time arrives, they will occur automatically. Buddha-Dhamma rejects these doctrines because they oppose the natural law of causality. The Buddhist teachings encourage people to search for the causes of suffering in conformity with this law of nature, beginning with those causes existing within an individual, i.e. volitional actions, karma of thoughts, words and deeds, both good and bad, those already performed, those presently being performed, and those stored up as character traits. And they have people examine their behaviour in relation to things around them to check if their actions are proper or improper in regards to various environmental factors. On a deeper level, the Buddha described craving tanha as the source of human suffering. Craving causes one to act, express oneself, and relate to the world incorrectly. One does not act with a knowledge of the truth, but rather one acts influenced by pleasure and aversion, by likes and dislikes, or by shielding oneself with such defilements as fear, conceit, envy, and distrust, which are a consequence of craving. There are three forms of craving: craving for sensual pleasures, kama tanha; the wish to obtain, to acquire, to consume; craving for existence, bhava tanha; the wish to become, to endure, to have eternal life; and the craving for annihilation, bhava tanha; the wish to cease existing, the wish for extinction. And on an even deeper level, the Buddha described the process of dependent origination, in which ignorance acts as the root of craving, the source from which all suffering flows. When one eliminates ignorance and craving, the causes for suffering, and one is not subject to the obstructive power of defilements, one is able to relate to the world, to other people, to other creatures, and to nature with wisdom. One has an understanding of the conditionality of all things, which enables one to solve problems in the optimal way available to human intelligence. Although some minor suffering remains, it is merely the dukkha inherent in nature and is incapable of overpowering one's mind. When one is free from the internal subjugation of craving, the only remaining responsibility is to reflect on the circumstances with which one is engaged, and to respond with wisdom for the happiness and well-being of others. On the contrary, as long as people are still oppressed by corrupting and distorting defilements, they have no chance to truly solve problems or to dispel suffering, both within themselves and outwards in society. In most cases, when people try to solve problems, they tend to make matters worse, either by increasing the problem at hand or by creating new ones. When they experience suffering, rather than bringing it to an end or reducing it by way of wisdom, they are coerced by craving to compensate for this situation, by increasing the original suffering, or by venting the suffering outwards and harming other people and society. Human suffering arises and exists in this way, subject to the dictates of craving and with the support of ignorance without end. See Nirodha, the cessation of suffering. Wisdom leads to unrestricted happiness and compassion. Once the Buddha had described suffering and its causes, which are matters of adversity and dissatisfaction, he assuaged the minds of those disciples receptive to his teachings and gave them hope by teaching the third noble truth of cessation, revealing that the oppression by suffering can cease. The basic problems of life can be solved. A desirable way out exists, one because the cause of suffering can be eliminated and brought to an end. Suffering exists dependent on causes. When these causes are removed, the result of suffering likewise ceases. When suffering ceases, the state of no suffering, freedom from suffering, arises automatically. Mental disturbance is transformed into a state of freedom, clarity, purity, and ease. For this reason, cessation is presented as the third noble truth, both because of the natural sequence of events and because of its aptness as a teaching method, which kindles interest, promotes understanding, and encourages practice leading to true realization. When one eliminates craving along with its companion defilements, which tyrannize and seduce the mind, one is no longer harassed by agitation, yearning, and anxiety, fear, animosity, loneliness, and boredom. One does not need to rely on the temporary happiness of fleeing from these disturbing mind states, of trying to bury them or replace them with something else, or of venting one's frustration outwards. By attending to suffering at its causes, the mind is now liberated, independent, peaceful, and possessed of a pure happiness. It is not assaulted by lingering doubts and fears. The normal, constant state of the mind is one of joy, clarity, and ease. One has reached spiritual perfection and fulfilled the act of realization, Satchikiriya. Similarly, when the mind is liberated from mental defilements and entanglements, when it is free and bright, ignorance no longer has any manipulative power. As a consequence, wisdom is also purified and freed from the deceptive and corrupting influence of the defilements. One is able to reflect on things correctly and in harmony with the truth, and discern things according to cause and effect. When ignorance and craving are not present to cause misunderstanding, wisdom is the principal agent to guide behavior. When one then acts, expresses oneself, and relates to the world with a thorough knowledge of the ways of nature. Apart from being the bedrock of internal purity and freedom, outwardly wisdom helps for applying one's personal knowledge and capabilities to solve other people's problems and to generate true well-being. A person's intelligence is used to its fullest extent without impediment or distortion, and it is used only for wholesome purposes. This is to live one's life guided by wisdom. Moreover, when a person is free, steady and naturally happy, not self-obsessed, not looking for things to consume, not trying to protect or reinforce the burden of self-importance, the mind becomes expansive and the feeling of freedom pervades outwards. One becomes receptive to the happiness and suffering of fellow creatures and one wishes to provide assistance. Wisdom is then provided with the power of compassion which helps to guide one's behaviour. One then lives fully for the well-being and happiness of others. When one is free from grasping and selfish attachment, one is able to perform virtuous and kindly deeds in a one-pointed, resolute and devoted way. Inwardly, one is free, happy and pure. Personal well-being has been brought to perfection, attahita sampati. Outwardly, one acts to support other people, parahita patipati. Together they complete the attributes of one who has realized cessation. A person who walks the noble path does not need to wait to experience the blessings and benefits of realizing Nibbana, the heart of cessation. Even while walking correctly along the path, one is able to constantly witness the increasing fruits of practice, both in regard to personal benefits and in regard to those blessings one can bestow on others. In ascending order, cessation nirodha is outlined by 5 stages. 1. Vikambana nirodha, cessation of suffering and defilement through suppression. To use concentration in order to make the mind tranquil, relaxed, free from dullness and anxiety. In particular, this means applying concentration on the level of jhana. During the entire period that one dwells in jhana, the defilements are stilled and one experiences happiness independent of sensual desires, nira misa sukha. To Tadanga nirodha, cessation of suffering and defilement by way of opposing or opposite qualities. Most importantly, this refers to an ability to reflect wisely, to understand the truth of phenomena, that they exist according to the law of causality and must be attended to by bearing in mind their causes and conditions. They are not subject to people's desires and attachments. With such wisdom, a person acts correctly and relates to things with understanding, goodwill and an inner freedom. Wisdom that clearly discerns things according to the truth is called insight wisdom, vipassana panya. Mental impurity and suffering is extinguished as long as this wisdom functions. The mind is calm, pure, bright and joyous. It leads to mental refinement and generates deeper levels of wisdom. 3. Samucheda nirodha, cessation of suffering and defilement through severance. One realizes transcendent stages of the path, beginning with the path of stream entry. Defilements and suffering cease completely and irrevocably according to the specific stage of the path. 4. Patipassadi nirodha, cessation of suffering and defilement through stilling. one realizes transcendent fruit pala. One is a noble being from Streamantara upwards. Defilements cease and the mind is pure and free according to the specific stage of being a noble person, Arya Pugala. 5. Nisarana Nirodha, cessation of defilements through relinquishment, the state of true and perfect deliverance, Nibbana.